I do want to ask you a practical advice for any dad that is no longer living with his children.
I want to encourage fathers in that scenario to be intentional about it. What ends up happening is that a lot of dads want to be the fun dad, and they take their kids on vacation, or they take them to the movies, or they increase the level of entertainment in order to hopefully win the hearts of the child over to them, to be like, I like you, you give me good things, you buy me good gifts, like you take me on great vacations. And I'm not against those kinds of vacations, but what I'm asking us to consider is how can we be really intentional about what we are doing with them? Take the opportunity to be really intentional about that. Don't just let yourself default to try to buy their affection. The number one thing that your children want from you is the answer to these questions. Am I worthy of love? And can and will you give it to me?
Hey everyone, welcome to my podcast, Fatherhood from the Heart. My name is Efren Martinez, and I am a father of 6 amazing children, a longtime educator, and a coach. I created this podcast to inspire and open the hearts of fellow men, fathers, parents, and teens who want to grow and develop a greater connection with their children, partners, and themselves. It shall also inspire in looking at the importance of our personal growth, the desire in looking at old ideas through new lenses, and the discoveries of our hidden potentials. I'm so glad you're joining me today to listen to my podcast. If you enjoyed what you've heard so far, please take a moment to like, share, and rate the show, as this will help me greatly in growing and bringing the wisdom of my guests into the world. Thank you very much for your support. It is an honor to introduce Chris Bruno as my guest to the show today. Chris is the co-founder and CEO of Restoration Project and the founder and CEO of Restory Counseling. He dedicated his life to helping people live fully and alive. He is the author of Sage, A Man's Guide into His Second Passage, Manmaker Project, A Father's Guide to Initiating His Son to Manhood, and Brotherhood Primer, A Journey into Genuine Masculine Friendship. Chris is a licensed professional counselor and has decades of experience in helping men recover their hearts. He's also the co-host of the Thrive Marriage Lab podcast and the Restorative Man podcast, where he explores themes of growth, marriage, healing, and relational restoration. After spending nearly a decade as a missionary in the Middle East with his wife, Chris returned to the US and began working alongside Dan Allender to curate restorative experiences. Now based in Colorado, Chris leads 2 dynamic teams. At Restoration Project, he develops experiences and resources to help men reclaim their identities in the realms of fatherhood, brotherhood, and sonship. And at Restory Counseling, he heads a story-informed team of therapists, spiritual directors, and story work counselors. He also offers Restory Intensives, immersive 3 to 5 day experiences designed for individuals, couples, and groups seeking deep healing and growth. I hope that you will enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Hello, Chris. I'm excited to have you here as my guest. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you. Thanks for the invitation to be with you. I am doing really well.
Chris, if you could take a few moments to introduce yourself to the audience, I would be grateful for that.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Chris Bruno, and I live in Northern Colorado. I have been married to my wife, Beth, for almost 30 years now, and we have 3 adult kids, 18, 21, and 24. So we are, as of this fall, officially empty nesters. And I started an organization called Restoration Project. It is a Christian ministry focused on men and helping men recover their hearts, as well as being intentional fathers, brothers, and sons. And then also I lead an organization that I started, Restory Counseling. It is a counseling practice with about 20 or so counselors and therapists and coaches based out of Northern Colorado, even though they are all across the United States. So that's what I do. I am a licensed professional counselor and an ordained minister, and I love working in the space of fatherhood.
That is wonderful. And that is, of course, why I invited you. Now, I've followed you. I've been following you for quite a few years, Chris. I just love your work.
Mm,
The books that you've written on fatherhood, on brotherhood, on
mhm,
manhood, on the new passage of man in after the midlife crisis. And yes, so what we're going to be talking today is about the Man Maker Project.
mhm.
I read that book. When was it? I think it was just shortly after it came out. And I was completely inspired. I was like, wow, that is
Mm,
exactly what I want to be doing with my son when he gets to be that age.
mm,
Unfortunately, life came in the way. We did separate as a family, and I did not get to do that officially. But nonetheless, it is something that I've carried with me as a desire to work with and help other parents, other fathers to
mhm.
get that initiation process. I think that is such a key point in a boy's life,
Yeah.
to
Oh, yeah.
have that moment, that initiation, and it's gotten lost in our culture. It's something that's been carried over for millennia, and we don't have it. And so many young men, so many young boys are lost. So I want to ask you first, before we get into the matter of the book, how can a man prepare on one of the most challenging and rewarding journeys of his life, namely the journey of fatherhood?
Oh, how can he prepare? Is that what you said?
Hmm. Yeah.
I think so. Here's two thoughts. First, I don't actually know that you can fully prepare because every day is a new day and you never know what's going to happen. And your child and you, like, it's so dynamic that you can't actually fully prepare. I think it would be so great if there was a college level class in fathering or at least an owner's manual in how to father children. And the reality is that each individual child is so unique and each individual father is so unique that that there's no kind of standard cookie cutter, this is how you prepare for it. That being said, if there was directions or categories for a dad to consider, I think the most important thing for him to consider on how he's going to father his children is for him to do his own work in his own life around his own father story, in his own heart. Because otherwise, you just mentioned, like with the rites of passage, like there's all these things are happening in our world today. We've lost it. When we as fathers are not tending to our own hearts, we can't tend to the hearts of our children. And so to prepare, I'm always calling men to do your own work, review your own life, heal your own words, your own wounds, know your own self and story so that you're not leaking it all over your children when you're trying to father them and parent them.
And that is so, so true. And I wish I had known that way back then when I first had my children.
Me too. Me too.
We try our best, and I am now at the point. My oldest children, they're adult. They left the home, and I keep inviting them to come and to do that work, and they're not ready to do that at this point. But it's an open invitation to that I have for them. How do you deal with that? You also have older children. How do you deal with the matters that we inevitably give unto our children, be it our own traumas, being transgenerational traumas that we put on them, and then once we wake up to that, we're like, oh my, how do I get to fix that again? How do
Yeah.
you deal with that?
I think the two most important things for a man to be considering in those spaces is this. It is never too late to own, and it is never too late to repair. And I feel like ownership comes before repair. And so much of like when we come awake to the reality of what we've done to our children for good or for ill, we need to come also to the place of having the wherewithal to own what that has been like for them to be our child, and not get defensive, recognize like, yes, I did that. And yes, I can see how that could have been harmful to you or hurtful, or even if it wasn't like intentionally hurtful or whatever, how that might have caused something in you. I can own that. As we as dads own the things that we need to own, then we open up the possibility of repair. And actually, I think some of the most brilliant spaces in relationship is when there is a rupture and followed by a repair. When we don't own, we cannot repair. All there is rupture. But when we own and then move into the place of like, I actually want to own that, apologize for that, recognize that, validate your experience as my child, that would be hard or difficult or wounding, that opens up the possibility for repair. So it's never too late to do that. And I mean, think about it for yourself. What would it be like for your father to come to you and say, hey, I want to recognize and own some of what what I did or didn't do in your life and how that must have felt to you. Even as an adult right now, like I would love for that conversation. It's never too late for those things to happen.
I must say, I am very fortunate in that way. My father did do that with me. And my father was very, very, very loving, but very strict. And he had a lot of issues he carried from his childhood that inevitably he gave on to me. But he did take that moment. I was 24 and he wrote me this beautiful letter. I'll never forget it. And in that letter, it was loaded with that repair and that love. And it was a very healing moment, of course. And we've had many conversations where he did take a lot of ownership. He did do his repairs on his side. So I'm very fortunate that way. And that is something that I too want to do with my children. And now taking it further to the next generation, how do I help my children to recognize the importance? Any parent, how do we allow our children, if they're not there yet, to recognize that it's so important to deal with their own wounds, with their own childhood, with us as their parents, so that they don't pass that on to their children?
Right. I think the first thing is how they have witnessed you doing that in your life, and your own repentance, your own humility, your own sense of, like I just said, ownership. All of those things, when they witness those in you, it actually creates permission for them to experience that as well. So that's the first. And then the second is, I think it's really good for us to tell our children, just straight up tell them, hey, this is really important for you to navigate, tend to care for these wounds that you have, because I want you, and I know that you want you to be the best parent that you can be. The way that I found for that, my son, my daughter, is for me to do my own work. And so that would be my hope for you. How can I support you? How can I come alongside of you in that journey?
Thank you so much. Chris, when we begin preparing for our own man-maker journey with our sons, what would you advise fathers to look out for in their sons?
I believe that each and every child is born with a unique brilliance, glory, beauty, awe, whatever it is, wonder, whatever you want to call it. Each child is born with something beautifully unique about them. And I think so much as fathers, we think fathering is shaping and molding our child to become what we have envisioned for them. And I actually want to ask dads to step back from that and wonder, like, who is the child and how can I help them become the them that they are already becoming? That there's something about the uniqueness of who they are that is my task to call it forth, to bring it out, rather than to shape it or construct it or mold it into a certain way that I've, preconceived notions of who I want my son or daughter to be. So when you ask that question, I think it is, can we have the orientation to see what is the story that is written into their lives and read it rather than attempt to write it?
And that is key. And I think so difficult for so many fathers and men to let go. Yeah. We want the best for our children. We think we know what's best, and we control it and control it and control it, taking away that freedom to develop their own potentials.
Yeah. And there's certainly values that we want to give them as guardrails, as, these are important things to be a human in the world. right? And integrity and honesty and, how you treat the next person, like all those are values. But
Absolutely.
when we have these preconceived notions of who I think you are supposed to become, because that's who I wish I had become, that's when I am projecting my own deficiencies onto my children and expecting them to fulfill me, rather than me coming alongside of them and discovering who they are and propping them up in that way.
Right. At that point, we're making them an object of what we want them to become rather than the subject of their own story.
Yes, absolutely. Well said. Absolutely.
Yeah. How can we create men in the 21st century? What are the greatest joys and challenges of our times, and how can we be ready for our boys when they need us most?
Mm. How can I start laughing a little bit? How can we create men in the 21st century? Because that is the task, isn't it? That is the
Yeah.
task. So I think one of the things is, first, before we start talking about how do we create men, I think one of the things we need to be considering is how do we actually raise humans?
Mhm.
And humanity, boys and girls, need to have a sense of their own identity, a sense of what it means to be in loving and connected and emotional exchanging relationships. And what does it mean to be a responsible citizen in the world? So all three of those are part of what it means to be a human.
Mhm.
And I think I laugh a little bit, how do we create men? Is that we have this notion that that men are something different, and often we lose the humanity of that.
Mhm.
And we need to actually think about how are we instilling and growing the human inside of my boy, not just the man inside my boy. Okay, so I want to start there, and then the second piece is it takes a lot of intentionality, it takes a lot of community, and it takes a lot of vision. So intentionality, community, and vision. And when I say intentionality, I don't just mean like, hey, I'm going to take my son to the baseball game or go play soccer or, whatever. All that is great. Or we're going to go fishing or hunting. All that is great. The intentionality is not just about the time that you spend, but about the focus that you have on what it is you're trying to cultivate, fertilize, grow inside of him. And usually those have to do with character qualities, perspectives, the idea of emotional and relational health. Like, how am I cultivating those inside of him? That takes intentionality.
Mhm.
It doesn't just, you don't just get a star or a check that says, hey, I took my son fishing and now I am a
Mhm.
good father, right? No, it's actually taking your son fishing is great. Go do that. And what are you doing in the context of his heart and in his mind? That is really where intentionality comes from. Community is gathering. You're not going to be enough for your son. The design of humanity is to be in relationship with others. And so the community of men, the company of men are the ones that are really growing the man out of your boy. And far too many fathers are trying to do that on his own. But when we collect and gather and invite other men into that journey, I, as the father, am still like the driver, but I am the one who's collecting the company to come around my son, because they will see things differently. They will say things differently. They will invite things differently, all from him, that I need to rely on that community.
Mhm.
And then, like I said, the third thing was vision. Having a vision for uh, what does it mean to be a man, and I want to be clear, like that might mean something different for you than it means for me, and something different in my culture versus your culture, or in my plate location, geography, whatever that means. But you need to have a vision for what that is, and then that informs then the intention and the community as well.
Mhm.
So I think often we have this notion that to become a man is one thing, versus it's something I believe that we're called to really wonder about, in the uniqueness of who the child is, and the uniqueness of his location, the uniqueness of who you are as a father, and then pull all those things together with a clear vision.
Beautifully said, and I 100% agree that it is about the humanity first, and then everything else comes in second. So thank you for reminding us of that as well,
Yeah.
Chris. Well said.
Mm.
How can I ask my son to follow his calling if I myself have not found mine, or I lack the courage to take the first steps?
Hmm. Well, I would say first that calling, we have this notion that calling is about something that I am to do. And I want to reframe that. If I'm following my calling, then I have this vocation, or I'm doing this certain thing, or I'm applying myself to the world in a certain way. And I want to step back from the idea that calling has to do with what you're doing, and reframe it in calling has more to do with who you are, back to the whole character piece. What is the character of who you are? Wherever I am called to be most fully Chris Bruno. That is the calling of my life. And whether I'm sitting here on a podcast with you, or I'm having coffee with my wife this morning, or I'm working later today in the office, whatever it is, like, I am called to be the fullness of who I am. And so, rather than, what I'm supposed to do. And I feel like so many more of us, when we reframe that, can actually move a lot closer with our own intentionality to becoming the man that we were designed to be, that we were called to be, that we were intended to be in every single moment. So if you've not found your quote unquote calling, then I would say you've not found your actual self. Versus, hey, I am stuck in this job that I don't like, and it's not my calling and whatever, but I'm doing it because I need to pay the bills. All right. Something like that, that it feels harder for us to actually imagine doing, inviting our boys into, our sons into something else, when we, according to that definition, haven't found our quote unquote calling. But when he sees that I am who I am, that I am living into who I am, then he then is invited to live into who he is as well. Back to that word permission. And talking about those things, I'm inviting him. We're exploring those kinds of things together, and he's not going to always be able to do what he wants to do, just like I can't always do what I want to do, right? But he can always be who he's supposed to be. That, I think, is what is important for our boys to see, as far as our calling and our participation in the greater narrative. Now, when it comes to having the courage is, it comes from the French word cœur, which is the word for heart. Okay. And so I believe that when we don't have courage, it means that we don't have the kind of heart that we need in order to do or step out and take that next step in my own life, or, whatever. Also, courage is situational. Right? Courage is situational. It's not characterological. And so I feel like there is, when I need courage, I can seek courage from someone else. I can take heart from someone else. I can listen to someone else, and they can encourage me. They can lend me some courage. I can borrow it from someone else. And I hope, even in like this podcast, that listeners can receive encouragement to go and be and become the men that we're supposed to be, just by listening to our conversation. So courage is something that we can share. And it also, you don't have courage until you're first afraid. You have to first be afraid. You have to first experience the sense of, what is going to happen? Do I have what it takes to do this? And then take that step.
And that is part of that initiation process in a man's life as a young boy.
Oh yeah, for sure. And one of the things that, in a rites of passage process, I just said a moment ago, the question that a man often has is, do I have what it takes? In the initiation process, it is the father's job to answer that question for the boy. You have everything that you need to become the man that you were designed to be. I see it. The men around me see it. We're going to verbally offer that kind of covering, that kind of blessing over you, so that if you ever in the future wonder, do you have what it takes? You can hearken back to the words that I am sharing with you now. I see it and I declare it. You have everything that you need. You have what it takes. So that is part of that initiation process. For sure.
Chris, in your book, The Man Maker Project, you speak about the importance of setting the right environment for this work to take place.
Mhm.
And obviously, we cannot go into every small detail that you mentioned there. You bring in the initiation of the father, which I think you spoke a little bit to, the intention, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
and also the removal of the feminine. Can you speak a little bit what you mean by that, the removal of the feminine?
Yeah. Um, One of my favorite proverbs around rites of passage is an African proverb, and it says that if we do not initiate our boys, they will burn down the village just to feel the heat.
Mm.
And I feel like that is so much of what we see in the world today is so many boys becoming men who haven't been initiated through the heat of their father, so they're looking for heat in other places.
Mhm.
And that's all kinds of things. That's drugs, alcohol, sex, extreme sports, um, uh, day trading. I mean, it could be any kind of thing that makes that sense of like intensity come and be experienced. I feel like some of the rites of passage process, the intention is to increase the intensity as a proving to himself and to other men that he actually does have what it takes. Otherwise, he'll look for places to go feel the heat. It's important as a company of men to remove the boy from the world that he's usually raised in, which is in primary parents are by and large the mother. There's also sisters around, there's teachers around, to remove him from that. If we're going to invite a boy into manhood, then we need to invite a boy into the company of men. And there's something really unique that happens in the company of men, just as unique as it is in the company of women. And so in order to remove him from the feminine, it is actually calling him forth, saying, now is your time. You're coming out of the home. You're coming out of the kitchen, if you will. You're coming out of that space, and we're going to take you to a place where we are going to provide that proving heat for you to prove yourself to us, and then we will declare that it is true. So that is why there's the removal of the feminine. And then I also write in the book about so that unto he can then be returned to the world of women in a way that honors them, upholds them, supports them, gives them a sense of value. So in order for the boy to become a man, the boy needs to leave women and come to the company of men, so that when he goes back, he's no longer a boy, but instead he's actually a man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that chapter in your book. I mean, I love all the chapters, but that circle is such an important process. You go on, you speak, you mentioned a little bit the process, that comes the pain, that comes the struggle. And then at the end, we come to the Father's blessing. Uh,
Yeah.
can you speak about that? Because that again is such an incredible moment. And yeah.
I talk about blessing in two different ways. One is the the biological passing of substance from father to a child is really only momentary and only half of a cell, right? It's when you think about women and the biological passing of material from her to the child, the child is grown in her womb, the child is nursed and fed. Like there's so much substance, physical substance, that is passed from mother to child, when the physical substance from a father to a child is literally just one sperm. And so I say that because I believe that blessing is equivalent to the physical substance. It is the substance that fathers can feed our children when their hearts and their souls and their minds and their bodies actually need that kind of sustenance. So our words bring forth life. Our words also kind of mete out death. And we have a choice on, is this going to be life words or death words? Another way that I talk about it is that inside the heart of every man it's like a nuclear power plant, where inside of me, it is designed to bring about, through my words, to bring about life and warmth and light to the world around me. When that power plant is operating and those words are flowing, the life words are flowing, warmth and wholeness and goodness come to the world around me. But those death words, if the nuclear power plant is shut down, then it is cold, it is absent, it is empty, there is just nothingness. And then if the nuclear power plant is like melting down and it is toxic, those words then bring about destruction and violence and harm and death. And so 2 out of the 3 of those, right, are about death, either absence or violence of words. There's only one that is life, and that is where I am intentionally crafting my words to offer a vision and that blessing that you talk about to my son and to my daughter, but to my son when his heart is so hungry to hear them. Back to what I said earlier about what would it look like, for me to hear from my father those words. You heard some words of blessing from your father in your 20s. Well, what would it look like for a generation, for our children to grow up never hungry for life words from their father? And if they are hungry, all they have to do is ask. Like, that's the kind of dad that I want to be. That my children never wonder. My children never have an unsatiated hunger inside of them for the words of blessing from me. So every rite of passage ends with some kind of, rites, the whole notion of rites is that there's some ritual ceremonial aspect to it. And I write about that in Manmaker Project. Every single rite needs to end with the proving of the boy in front of the men, and then with verbal words of blessing over him. And we see examples all throughout history. We see examples through all of faith traditions. Like this is the reality of what it means to be human. And we hunger for those words.
Can you just give us now a brief overview of what such a year would look like in preparing a boy and preparing oneself too for this blessing at the end?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times we think about a rite of passage as just like one evening or one ceremony. And I actually think, think about how long puberty takes in a boy's life for it to begin and grow, and then for him to start to get some stubble or some arm hair, like that kind of stuff, like for him to actually transition physically from boy to man. I think it's important for us to elongate our journey, our passage into a more than just one evening or one ceremony, because you don't flip a switch and all of a sudden this boy is now a man. It's a journey. And so in the Manmaker Project, I talk about taking a year. I call it the man year. And this year in the book, I list out 6 different qualities of manhood that I wanted for my son, and felt that those were kind of ubiquitous, but you might choose others, maybe borrow from me, borrow from someone else, but just choose 6. I think any more than 6 is too much. Any less than 6, and you're not like covering all the things you want to cover, spread out the year, take your 12 months and divide it into 6 2-month segments. And for each 2-month segment, you're going to focus on one of those character qualities that you want to talk about and instill, and maybe having an experience with your son around, watch some movies around, talk, have those conversations while you're out fishing, have those intentional conversations around that specific character quality. The other thing that I encourage people to do, back to the community, is to gather men from your life, whether it's your brothers or your brother-in-law or your father, your grandfather, your friends, a pastor, a coach, whoever it is, men that you know and trust with the life of your son. So that might exclude someone else. It might exclude your father or a coach or a brother or something like that. But find about 6 men to journey with you through that process, 5 or 6 men to journey through that process with you. And then ask each of those men to take your son on some kind of experience. It might be just for a few hours. It might be for a weekend. And focus during that 2-month time on that experience with that man, who he's then speaking into the life of your son as well with regard to that character quality. So, for example, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that my son learned was in the realm of purity. And I thought that purity, we have, all kinds of notions of what purity is. The way that I think about it is that purity is thinking rightly about another person, thinking rightly about another person. And so I asked one of my brother-in-laws to focus on purity with my son, because I knew that my brother-in-law had had some challenges in that area of his life. And so it wasn't that he was a champion of it. It was that he had walked through the dark valley with that aspect of things. Another was I have excellent action as one of my character qualities. I wanted my son to learn what excellent action is, taking action and doing it excellently. Well, I chose my other brother-in-law, who is a high-ranking guy in the Navy, and he took him for a weekend, and they did all kinds of like really intense things and in excellence, and showed him what it looks like in the military to live with excellence. So breaking out your year like that, and having 2 months and 2 months and 2 months, and then at the end, you gather those guys as best as you can to have a communal gathering, a ceremony where your son kind of proves out himself. He's learned what each one of those things is. He's learned and has to answer questions. He has to face the heat a little bit, like I said. Maybe there's a physical challenge, a mental challenge, an emotional challenge, those kinds of things. And then you end in a ceremony of where each of those men that you have journeyed with gather around your son, speak words over him, speak life words over him, and then really kind of welcome him into that company of men. And from that point on, even though he's still maybe only 13 or 14 years old, he's not actually a full man yet. We start to treat him as such and call him to that table of men instead of the table of children anymore. And so there's something new that begins to happen in him. So it is that final ceremony of blessing that's not just the one-time experience, but intended over the course of a year.
I love that. It's really inspirational.
And I will say this, that is really challenging, and that is an ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That is, and so I, through the years, have worked with lots of men who've been able to do something like that, but also men who've taken the 1 year and made it 2, or don't have other men in his life that he trusts with his son. And so kind of you have to find your own way around this and into it. The whole purpose, though, is that at the end of the experience, you get to look your son in the eyes, and you get to say, you have what it takes. You are a man.
As a little side question.
Sure.
We're speaking here primarily about our sons. How can I, as a father, accompany my daughter into womanhood?
Well, a couple things I'll say to that. First of all, like, I've never walked the path from girl to woman, and so I don't actually know what that path looks like. So I love your word just now, like accompany instead of lead. And I think that's an important distinction. I can lead my son into manhood, but I cannot lead my girl into womanhood. I can accompany her along the way. And so one of the primary things I think as a father for our girls is to partner intentionally with their mother in order to raise them into that woman, because she's walked that journey. And if your wife or the mother of your child is not available, there can be other people. And this is also for boys too. Like, there can be surrogates, right? There can be other people that can step into that space. So there's that. Walk with your daughter along the way. The other main thing I would say is that where our boys need to feel our heat, our girls do not need to feel our heat, because they will get burned. Girls need to feel our warmth. They need to know that there is something warm and inviting and tender and available and consistent and strong and kind and all of those things that they can come to and kind of in the cold world warm up to again when they come into our presence. And so I feel like so much of what we do with our girls in this passage journey is offer them offer them our warmth, offer them our generous gentleness in being with them. It still involves having a vision. It still involves seeing who they are. It still involves all the way back to where we started with. We're still growing a human first before we're growing a woman. And so I want to make sure that I'm helping in those categories to make sure that I am emotionally available and attuned. And so that I'm training them how to be, like all that. I have 2 girls. I have 1 boy and 2 girls. And the journey between all of them was so different. And it's just as important to be present with the girls as it is with the boys. Of a different nature, but still just as present.
Thank you, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the boys, so we live in a time when many young boys are faced with a feeling that being a man is seen as, for lack of a better word, dirty, dangerous, unsafe. And there's all these reels you can find online about, would you rather be with a man than with a bear and all those things. How can we help our boys to redefine boyhood and masculinity and live with pride and strength, with confidence, while still being kind and gentle and respectful and empathetic?
Mm-hmm. I see those things too, and it's frustrating. It's scary because I think a world without men is a scary place, and I think a world without women is a scary place. And so those things being co-equal, I think one of the I talk about kind of the centerpiece of manhood in my mind is the combination of strength and tenderness. That when those 2 things are co-equal inside of a man's heart, where he is strong and not violent, and tender and not weak, that actually is the part that I'm wanting to grow inside of and elicit call out in my boy, in the world around me, and actually cast a vision for. You mentioned one of my books, Sage, which is actually about the second rite of passage. We're talking about right now from boy to man. The second rite of passage is from man to sage. I talk often in that around how we need to have a vision of someone. I want to become the kind of man where everyone takes a breath, a sigh of relief when I walk into the room. Like, oh, okay, we're going to be okay because he's here. And that doesn't mean that, I'm the strongest man in the room. It doesn't mean I'm the biggest warrior in the man. It means that I'm the safest and I have the balance of strength and tenderness. I can show up with all of who I am, and I'm not going to take your head off in the process. I'm going to show up with, you shall not pass, right? Not on my watch. And I'm going to hold you gently and tenderly and attune to you and see your heart in the process. So that I think is what we need to reframe in a vision of what it means to be a man. And there's so many different ideas of what a man is. And I think that fits the heart of a man most in whatever rendition you're talking about.
I love that. So we're coming towards the end, and I do want to ask you a few more things. One would be just maybe a practical advice for any dad out there that is no longer living with his children. There's way too many people that live in divorce and that still care and still love their children and sometimes don't get the opportunities that they would want to. What can they do to stay connected? What can they do to still show up and to give them their love and their needs met?
Mm-hmm. My heart breaks when I hear you say that because I know a lot of men in that situation. And I'm going to say the same word I used before, and that was intentionality. I think often what I hear from men in that scenario is that, I get the kids every other weekend, or I see them just for one holiday a year or something like that. And I want to encourage fathers in that scenario to, if you are going to get face-to-face time with them, to be intentional about it. What ends up happening is that a lot of dads want to be the fun dad, and they take their kids on vacation, or they take them to the movies, or they increase the level of entertainment in order to hopefully win the hearts of the child over to them, to be like, I like you, you give me good things, you buy me good gifts, like you take me on great vacations. And I'm not against those kinds of vacations, but what I'm asking us to consider is, how can we be really intentional about what we are doing with them, that if I do have every other weekend, or, over the summer, a couple of weeks or something, what am I going to be doing in the midst of that time that I have? Take them on vacations, go to movies, all that kind of stuff. Sure. But if you really want to grow the man or the woman out of your child, take the opportunity to be really intentional about that. Don't just let yourself default to try to buy their affection. The number one thing that your children want from you is the answer to these two questions. Am I worthy of love? And can and will you give it to me? Am I worthy of love, and can and will you give it to me? We assume that our children just want toys and our, entertainment and all those kinds of things, but that's not actually what they want. They actually want to hear, yes, you, my son, my daughter, are worthy of my love, and I'm going to do everything in my power to give it to you. That attunement, which is tuning into their hearts, tuning into their minds, tuning into their souls, that is ultimately what they want. One of my favorite authors, he says that we were all born into the world looking for someone looking for us. And I think when we are, as fathers, even if we're not with our children all the time, we can be constantly looking for our children, and they are looking for us, looking for them. Can we find them? Can we be there for them? I think the other piece of that, especially not outside of time, is, in communication with them, those just regular awareness of what is happening in their lives, how they're feeling, asking less about how did the soccer game go, and asking more about how did you feel about the soccer game. Asking less about did you make the grade, and asking more about tell me about your friend group at school. Right? The more relational and emotional spaces, where I think, again, as men, we can get so caught up in, are you making the grade? Did you get your homework in? Are you obeying your teachers? Right? Did you get accepted to XYZ? That's what we end up focusing on, and believe that our children's success is in those things, when actually our children's success is in who they are on the inside and their emotional and relational state. And so, even if you're not with them all the time, those are the kinds of, make sure that you're focusing on those kinds of questions and inquiries with them and conversations than anything else.
Well, stuff. Just was getting the goosebumps. Thank you so much, Chris. That's very strong stuff. And good advice for all the dads who cannot be with the children. I like to ask a few questions that I ask to all my guests. Sure. My first one to you would be, if you had a chance to see your younger self and have a conversation with him, what would you tell him?
It's interesting because I talk with my younger self all the time.
Okay.
And this is one of the most common things. One of the most common things I say to him, because he often feels like he needs to hear this. You are not the only one fighting for you. You are not the only one fighting for you. Because I grew up in a family where just the family dynamics were, it felt like I was the only one fighting for, I was the only one fighting for me, because none of them were actually seeing me or caring for me or tending to me or fighting for me, and I had to fight my way through. And so now I would want to speak to him and say, hey, you're not the only one fighting for you. Is there something that you would have liked to hear from your dad that was never said? How much time do we have? So much. So many things. Okay. So many things. I think I think if I were to boil it down to, I mean, I mentioned this earlier already, but if I were to boil it down, I think I would want to hear him say that, Chris, you have what it takes. You have what it takes. And then blank, you have what it takes to blank. You have what it takes to marry that woman. You have what it takes to get that job. You have what it takes to live your life. You have what it takes to honor God. You have what it takes to, to whatever it is, you have what it takes. I see it in you and I honor it and I bless it. That's what I would want to hear.
To wrap it up, Chris, what is your one piece of advice to all the fathers out there?
It's never too late. Whether your child is yet to come, if you're not yet a father, or you're a father of a 50-year-old, it is never too late to turn the corner in who you are and how you engage with your son or your daughter. Because just as you have longed for those questions you just asked me, just as you would still want to hear those words from your father, so they are still longing to hear words from you. It's never too late. The longer it is, the more repair you might have. That might be a reality, but at the same time, it's never too late to start the process.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been wonderful having you here. It's been a real honor. I've been so excited. I've been looking forward to this interview for a very long time. So thank you so much for taking the time and being here with me.
Oh, my pleasure. So great to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time and listening to my podcast today. If you want to learn more about me, check out my website, www.fatherhoodfromtheheart.com. There you will find information about my coaching offers and approach. I would be honored to accompany you on your path, be it on your own or with a parent, partner, daughter, or son. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast. Then link and share this episode so that more can hear, learn, and grow from the wisdom of my guests. I would also be incredibly grateful if you could rate and review the show, and please don't forget to leave a comment. I will end the show for now, but remember to be kind to yourself. Until next time, I say goodbye and send love and gratitude from my heart to yours.